going on? Why are you here?
Well, my wife and I got into an altercation. She attacked me, and she's deceased. I can give you the address.
This is the moment Catherine Martinez's family finally got to stand in front of the man who took her from them and say exactly what was on their minds. And this is Russell Neal himself. On the same day, he walked through the front door of a police station, telling the officer at the front desk what he had just done. But behind those flat words was one of the most calculated and cold-blooded acts in Houston's recent memory, and the road that led there goes back years before that afternoon at the police station. We are going to walk through all of it. Back in the early 90s, Russell Neal was genuinely somebody worth paying attention to. He was a founding member of High Five, an R&B group that came out of Waco, Texas, and for a few golden years, they were everywhere you looked. Their debut album went platinum. Their sound was shaped in part by legendary producer Teddy Riley, and their single, I Like the Way, went all the way to #1 on the Billboard charts. They were on BET, Arsenio Hall, and Soul Train, riding the kind of wave most artists only ever dream about. And Russell was the face of all of it, the one the record company literally branded as the lovelorn Lothario in their promotional material. He was the heartthrob, the one the girls screamed for, the member the label put front and center whenever the cameras came around.
I met Catherine in August of 2007.
But fame like that is a window, not a permanent address, and Russell's window closed faster than he was ready for it to. He walked away from the group after their second album over money and creative arguments with the label, wanting more singing parts than they were willing to give him, and once he stepped out that door, there was nothing waiting for him on the other side. The hits stopped, the money got thinner, and the years that followed only made things worse, because by the time the next decade came around, he was collecting legal trouble one charge at a time, starting with a trespassing case in 2004 and building up to a 2009 arrest that came with drunk driving, marijuana possession, and resisting arrest, all stacked together. The man who was supposed to be somebody was slowly becoming someone people used to know. Now let's talk about the woman at the center of this story, because she deserves to be seen fully before we talk about how she was taken. Catherine Martinez was born in Chicago on January 15, 1990, and raised by her mother, Mary Figueroa, who loved her so much she called her My Bonita, which means beautiful.
My name is Catherine, but she went by Diamond, so that's what I called her. Her nickname was Diamond. And Diamond is the type of person that you're gonna see her, you're gonna notice her, she's gonna shine, she's gonna make her presence known.
And Catherine grew into exactly that, not just on the outside, but in energy and in spirit. She was a fitness trainer, a model, an aspiring boxer, and a competitive bodybuilder who actually won championships and built a genuine online following under the name Brasilia. She trained like her life depended on it, chased every goal like it was owed to her, and the people who knew her described someone who treated every single day like an opportunity she was not going to waste. But underneath all that hustle, she was a mother before anything else. She put her 2 boys in private school and prepped their meals ahead of time so nothing in their lives got left to chance. And she had a generosity about her that made her the kind of person you could call at 2 in the morning knowing she would actually show up. By her own words, her biggest flaw was that she cared too much, and that flaw is part of what kept her locked to the wrong man for far longer than she ever should have stayed. The two of them met around 2008 at the nightclub where Catherine was dancing to fund her modeling and fitness career. Russell made his move, and the old fame still carried just enough glow that she was genuinely excited at first, telling her family she was dating a real member of High Five. She was barely 18 years old, and he was already well into his 30s, and from that very first moment, the people who loved her had a bad feeling about the whole situation.
She studied advertising, design, and print, but she made it known, I'm a model.
That money gap became the entire foundation of how this relationship operated. Since Russell was not bringing in anything consistent, Catherine became the one carrying the rent, the bills, and the everyday cost of 2 grown people and 2 children. Things got even worse early on when she accidentally totaled his car because she felt guilty about it and started covering even more of their shared expenses to make it right. Her family watched all of it and never bought his act for a single second. They described his eyes as dark and cold. They could see he had nothing real to offer, nothing real to contribute, and watched a generous and hard-working young woman pour herself into a man who reportedly had the nerve to charge her $40 to watch their own children when she needed someone to look after them. And then there was the part Catherine worked the hardest to keep hidden. Her family described a home full of real domestic violence, with bruises and scratches she covered up with makeup before facing the world each day like everything was fine.
She could wear anything and it would look good on her, you know, and she rocked it to the fullest.
Russell would always find his way back with the same tired playbook, promises that he had changed, and reminder that they had built a family together. She kept giving the relationship one more chance than it ever earned. But by the middle of 2014, all those chances had finally run out. By the summer of 2014, the gap between these two had become impossible to look away from. Catherine was in the best stretch of her life, getting more modeling opportunities, building her fitness brand, gaining real recognition, and moving toward the kind of future she had always worked for. Russell, meanwhile, was sitting in their apartment building a fantasy out of nothing. He had a whole written plan sitting at that desk, big talk about becoming a billionaire in 5 years, going off to business school in New York, passing financial exams, and transforming himself into a mogul. The last weekend before everything collapsed, Catherine packed up the boys and traveled to Killeen, Texas to spend time with her family, and that visit made it clear to everyone there that she was finally done and ready to move forward on her own. She left her mother's house on June 28, 2014, and that was the last time her family ever saw or heard from her alive. Even her training partners started to panic because the woman who never missed a session and never went quiet without a word suddenly went completely dark.
I call her Team No Sleep. She'd be on the computer all night looking for her next shoot. She would go to bed just before the sun come up and then go to class and then come home and then get ready for her job at night. Like she was gonna do it by any means necessary.
What happened inside that apartment over the next 2 days is not easy to put into words, but the evidence that came out later told a clear enough story. Catherine was attacked inside her own home in a sustained and brutal assault that investigators would go on to describe as overkill. Stabbed and beaten in a way that spoke not to a moment of panic, but to something far more deliberate and sustained. Instead of calling anyone or leaving, Russell stayed right there with her. The couple's 2 small sons, around 5 and 3 years old, were locked in a nearby room the entire time, just feet from where their mother was being attacked. At some point, one of those babies walked out, saw blood on his father's shoes, and was told it was ketchup before being sent back to the room. Those boys carried that night into nightmares for years after. After spending close to 2 days inside that apartment with what he had done, Russell Neal cleaned himself up, put on fresh clothes, and calmly walked into a police station.
She was a dancer, and she would use her money to book her flights to her shoots, and then she'd come back to school and go to class the next day. She knew that that's what she wanted to.
Around 6 in the evening on July 2nd, 2014, Russell walked into a Harris County Sheriff's Office station and told the worker at the front window that his wife was deceased at their apartment. A High Five fan who happened to be in the station that day recognized him from the old days and took photos of him being led away in handcuffs. Neighbors who heard what had happened said they were not entirely surprised, that a guilty conscience must have been the thing that finally walked him through that door. Those few flat sentences were all the police needed to go and find the rest of the story for themselves. Officers and paramedics went to the Tanglewide apartment and had to force the front door open, and when they stepped inside, they found Catherine on the living room floor underneath a blanket. What they found when they examined her body confirmed exactly what the family had feared since she stopped returning calls. The physical evidence at that scene, combined with the confession Russell had just walked in and handed them, built a case that was essentially complete before detectives had even really started working. The two young boys were recovered from the apartment and taken to safety.
From the early 90s, High Five became a huge success. And part of their success was that they were able to ride the crest of a #1 record, not once, not twice, but 3 different times on the all-important pop charts.
Investigators documented every detail, from the condition of the home to the nature of Catherine's injuries, and what the scene showed them was a picture of violence that went far beyond any argument getting out of hand. For a short time, Russell spoke to detectives after turning himself in, but then he went quiet and asked for a lawyer, and he was taken into custody without putting up any fight at all. He was charged with murder in the 232nd District Court and held on a $100,000 bond that was later fully revoked. The case looked straightforward. He had confessed, and the physical evidence backed it up completely. The prosecutors had what they needed, and Catherine's family had every reason to believe that justice was finally within reach. But then they found out what was coming next. While all of this was playing out, Catherine's family was living through something no family should ever have to face. The attack had been so severe and so sustained that her own mother could barely recognize her at the morgue. "The only thing I recognize about her, it was her teeth, her mouth. You know, the way she would smile," her mother said.
She was 18 years old and he was in his 30s. I didn't really get a good vibe from him.
Just when it looked like the road to a conviction was clear, Russell pulled a move that would drag this case out for years and test every bit of patience the family had left. While he sat in custody waiting on his trial date, he stopped going by the name Russell Neal and started telling everyone around him that he was Jesus. He had walked himself through the front door of a police station, handed them the confession himself, and now he was standing in front of doctors claiming his mind was too far gone to face what he had done. The prosecutors were not about to let him walk through a legal loophole, and they kept the murder charge alive through every competency hearing, delay, and strategy his defense team tried to manufacture. His sisters-in-law were publicly calling the whole performance an act, convinced he was playing the system and betting that enough stalling would eventually wear the case down. For a stretch that lasted years, it genuinely looked like this case might never get a real ending. But the state held its ground, and eventually reality caught up to Russell in full. He originally wanted to roll the dice and take his chances with a jury, betting that the mental illness story might work in a courtroom the same way it had been working in the competency hearings. That bet collapsed at the last minute, with the case first on the docket and the full weight of the evidence about to be laid out in front of 12 people. He took a deal instead.
What's going on? Why are you here? Well, my wife and I got into an altercation. She attacked me, and she's deceased. I can give you the address.
But to the people who raised Catherine and loved her, and are still living with the empty space she left behind, that number was never going to be enough. Here is where this story takes a turn that genuinely sounds too dark to be real. Because Russell was not even the first man in that family to do this exact thing to a woman who decided she was done. 6 years before Catherine was taken, Ronald's Zoner brother Ronald McNeil took the life of his own wife, Stovine Maggi, in Arlington, Texas, and when you lay the two cases side by side, the similarities are almost impossible to look at without feeling sick. Stovine was a young mother with 2 small children, just like Catherine. Her marriage was full of abuse that she largely kept to herself, just like Catherine. Ronald reportedly locked her in closets, used a belt buckle on her, and at one point during a night of drinking and drug use, pinned her down and sprayed disinfectant directly into her face. She covered her bruises with makeup the same way Catherine did, kept showing up to life like everything was fine, and eventually reached the exact same breaking point. The moment Stovine decided she was done was the moment everything became dangerous. She filed for divorce, and that very same morning, Ronald forced his way back into the home and shot her 5 times while one of her young sons was on the phone with 911, begging for someone to come help. Then he locked himself inside and stayed there while she bled, letting police negotiators talk at him for hours without giving an inch, the whole time knowing exactly what he had done and choosing to let it finish. When Stovine's own brother called to find out what had happened, Ronald did not hesitate for a second. When the SWAT team finally moved in, Ronald opened fire on officers and only stopped because he had used up all his bullets. He tried his own version of an insanity defense before eventually pleading guilty and receiving 80 years in prison, which under Texas law means he cannot seek early release until he has served at least 30. Even the people who knew both cases best could not fully explain how this pattern ran so deep through the same household. The abuse in both relationships had been going on for a long time before anyone outside the home saw it clearly. Friends and family had noticed things, sensed things, had conversations that did not go anywhere because the women always found a way to explain it away or defend the men they were with. Both Catherine and Stovine were the kind of people who carried everyone else's weight without complaint, and that same quality made it hard for the people who loved them to push hard enough when it mattered most. The families who survived both of these cases have been very clear about what they want people to take from all of this, and it is not complicated. What do you think about this deadly pattern in one household?